We're continuing on with our exploration of astrology as it relates to a mystical path. And as you can probably tell from the previous videos in this series on the Sun, Moon, and Mars, we are approaching the idea of mysticism from a little bit different viewpoint. And from my perspective, practicing yogic meditation for 2 decades and studying astrology for nearly as long, when I consider the idea of mysticism, it is an idea of wholeness, a realization of wholeness. And the planets are aspects of ourselves, facets of ourselves, just like our arms and our legs are part of our body. They are our body. But of course, we can call them arms and legs to differentiate different sections of the body. So the planets themselves are, in a way, different powers of our consciousness. They can also be considered, in a way, different powers of the divine, but the divine is one. These are just different facets of that one. And in our current discussion, as we review Mercury, this is very important because Mercury is a planet of mysticism and of magic. For example, in the Tarot, some consider the magician to be representative of Mercury, and I agree with that assessment. And why is this the case? Because the magician, the one who knows how to wield magic, isn't doing anything profound or special. It's that the magician knows the rules and the laws of reality and is skilled, accomplished in that. There's a reason when you look at the tarot, standard tarot deck, and you see the magician, all the elements are there represented within that card, but they are in a sense under the mastery of the magician, or the magician's able to work in harmony with those things. And Mercury, as we know from an Ayurvedic perspective, is considered tridoshic. A healthy Mercury very easily has a good balance of all of the doshas from an Ayurvedic perspective. We know that Mercury has the capacity, we say that Mercury is two-faced or two-sided, but essentially what we can derive from that isn't that that's a problem so much, it's that Mercury is able to recognize and see the points of view from many different perspectives. So when he's hanging out with you and you have a particular kind of political vantage point, he'll be able to understand that and get right behind it. So yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying there. But then when Mercury goes and spends time with people who don't agree with you politically and maybe have very different viewpoints, he'll understand that as well, because Mercury is able to understand very deeply multiple different vantage points. To work with Mercury, funnily enough, while Mercury is related to the magician in the tarot and that kind of energy, Mercury really responds well to a very practical approach to success in life. So Mercury will be one of the least likely planets to recommend or think, oh, let's go get a yagya to take care of my credit card debt. Mercury's not going to say that. Mercury, when he is enlivened and clear and functioning within your life, Mercury's not going to say, let's go pay some holy people in another country to chant some mantras for me so I get rid of credit card debt. Mercury is going to say, what you need to do is stop putting money on your credit card, maybe get a second job and pay that down. Because that is a rule of how to work with finance as well, and Mercury understands that. So in order to strengthen our Mercury, to work with our Mercury, to embody the wholeness of ourselves, meaning integrating that power of Mercury, we have to know what Mercury is all about, and we have to live in harmony with that power of Mercury. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to look at The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2. And one of the most useful chapters in this book, from my own perspective, is the chapter on the Lajatatiya Avashtas, because it shows how planets interact with each other. But at the beginning of each planetary description of these Avashtas, we talk about what are the planets about, because you have to know what the planets are about to know how they're going to interact with other planets and what they are about. So from this book, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2, and this is from the chapter on the Lajtari Avashtas, which is chapter 11. Is it chapter 11? Yeah, chapter 10, chapter 11 talks about this. There's some lists of what each planet represents. And from chapter 10, Mercury represents communication, the skin, our ability to cognize, travel, discernment, games, relatives, craftsmanship, mantra, commerce, corporations, and learning. So when we're looking at Mercury within the chart, these are the things that Mercury is going to represent. So his position, his situation will tell us how well do we relate to these things, how well do we embody these things. Again, communication, the skin. Now the skin can be our physical skin of our own body, but the skin represents boundaries in a way. So any kind of boundaries you have in relationships, with business partners, with your children, with the world at large. Our ability to cognize, our ability to perceive and see things as they are. That's why Mercury is so important when it comes to exploring things like mental health. Because sometimes people have mental health issues not because of innate craziness. It's because they don't see things clearly. They're not able to cognize or put two and two together. So Mercury is our ability to see what is really happening. And this idea comes up a lot in spiritual texts, yogic texts, where they describe walking down a path and you see a rope on the path. And because you don't have all the information, all Mercury represents information, you're not cognizing exactly what's going on over there, you think that rope is a snake. So when Mercury is healthy, he's going to be able to recognize immediately, oh, okay, I see the shadow, I see it's not moving, it's not a snake, it's a rope. But many people have difficulties because they see things within their life that aren't really there because of illusions, misperceptions, and delusions. And this is one of the reasons why yogic practice in general is so important, because the whole point of it is to remove those things. Travel, our ability to move from one place to another, discernment, games. Mercury represents the ability to play games. Now that is the ability to play games that are fun, like Monopoly or cards, but it's also the ability to play the game of life. When you meet people who just don't want to sell out, they don't want to play the game of life, well, it's probably because Mercury isn't allowing them to enjoy the temporal situation that their soul is involved in. Relatives, craftsmanship, mantra, commerce, corporations, and learning. Craftsmanship is an important one. Too often you see people who don't really want to take the time to do something well. I once saw recently a little meme or a picture where it shows a little cartoon figure that's like a music teacher and then a little cartoon student with a violin, and the student says to the teacher, "Can't I just skip all this practice stuff and go to where I'm awesome?" Mercury understands the tedious amount of skill and technique and time to really work at something, to make it beautiful, to really do a good job with something. So craftsmanship is very important with Mercury. And to that end, if you have difficulty having a sense of what does it take to build something great, or if you're impatient or you're not able to enjoy the game of training your nervous system or training your body or training your life to be successful in certain ways, that's where Mercury needs work. And so again, from a very realistic standpoint, you're not going to run off and do yagyas or special magical rituals for Mercury. You're going to do what is really required to develop a skill, and you're going to put in the time, the months, the years to get good at it. Now, Mercury does benefit from things like mantras, and Mercury is the magician. But we have to remember that this idea of empowering things through mantra, empowering things through magic, that's not to take the place of the work. Just like, for example, when you wear gemstones, yes, there is a particular quality to those gemstones when they get within your field, but it's just a raw energy. They serve as a reminder for you to embody whatever the planet of that gemstone represents. Say you're wearing a gemstone for Jupiter and you have difficulties with forgiveness. Well, the gemstone itself isn't really necessarily doing the work. It's like the fuel, but you still have to drive the car, which means you still have to use that fuel to practice forgiveness. So the mantras, the gemstones, the magic, these esoteric things, they are the power and the fuel, but you, as a sentient being, still have to drive the vehicle. You still have to channel and direct those energies. And it's Mercury that shows how well are you able to do that. If your Mercury is not functioning properly, then all you do is put on gemstones, get yagyas, do magical rituals, sit back and think the world's magically going to change. When really you do those things to empower yourself so you've got the energy and the capacity to go out and make the changes. That statement, God helps those who help themselves. Well, that ties into this. There is the power and support of this divine quality there, but you are a part of that. So you as a sentient being, as an individual, have a role to play in that regard. And the more we can realize this and recognize this, the stronger Mercury becomes, and the more holistic you're able to function as though Mercury is a healthy part of you. It is. It is a part of you, but how healthy is it? You have to develop that. Now, I'm going to move a few pages along in the book to where we focus specifically on Mercury and the avashtas of Mercury. And there's just a few paragraphs for us to focus on. In the very first sentence, from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2 and Chapter 11, states, Mercury is one's ability to manage the affairs of mundane living. Mercury is one's ability to manage the affairs of mundane living. When you work with Mercury, you are recognizing that as a sentient being, you are here in this time-space continuum. Of course, it's temporary and it's not where you're going to stay. But while you are here, there is a role to play. There is a game to play. And some of us have more enjoyable games than others, but either way, there is still a game to play for all of us. If you have a disorganized life, you're going to have disorganized results. Now again, we have to, in a way, avoid a little bit of magical thinking and the idea that if you just simply change your thoughts, then everything else gets better. It's more likely that if you change your thoughts, everything else gets better. But it's almost certain that things are going to get better if not only do you change your thoughts, but you begin to act and think differently, as though you reinvent yourself. So one of the ways to incorporate and embody Mercury in a healthy fashion is to stop whatever you're doing, if you've got a lot of problems in your life, and to simply list out what are those problems. And then consider people who don't have those problems. And then ask yourself, what are they doing that prevents that kind of issue in their life? Or what aren't they doing? Now again, as I mentioned earlier, Mercury wants you to be skillful and like a craftsman. So you are a craftsman of your life. And that takes time and that takes dedication. So if you're not willing to stop and figure out what are these other people doing who don't have these problems, and do that, if you're not willing to do that, well, you're not working with Mercury, and you shouldn't really expect to have fantastic results and changes within your life. For example, some people get walked on all over the place. I can think of a couple relatives where people just take advantage of them, and they complain about it, and they know they're being taken advantage of. And when the people come over and with their nice smile and their schmoozing mentality act nice, well then they encourage getting what they want. Whereas the relatives I'm thinking of, if they just would say, no, you're not doing that, and they were consistent about that, no, Well, then they put up this boundary, which is Mercury here, and then they're less likely to get walked over later. They're less likely to get schmoozed later on. So you really have to be clear on your boundaries with people, boundaries with situations, and recognize that certain people have problems because they don't take actions to prevent those problems consistently, and consistency is a key here. We think about Mercury and Saturn, they get along, not when they're right in the same house, but usually they can support each other. Consistency, detachment, this helps to increase the power of Mercury within your life, and increases one's ability to manage the affairs of mundane living. And this even speaks to a yogic perspective. Why in the philosophies of yoga, why in the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course, the 2-year Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course that we do at Kriya Yoga Online, why is it that there are all these points that say, go to bed at the same time, eat at the same time, practice harmlessness, truthfulness, non-possessiveness, contentment? Why do we commit our lives to doing that? Practicing brahmacharya, conserving our resources. Because those set up a foundation of life such that you are managing the affairs of your life well. If you do that consistently, if you let go of all your whining about how you think things should be, and you simply connect with and commit to the practices described, say, in the Yoga Sutras, the yamas and niyamas, many of the difficulties in your life won't be there because you're living in such a way that doesn't allow them room to grow. And this is important for something like yoga practice, because the less distractions you have in this mundane world, and it's not negating the mundane world, it's saying manage the mundane world, the more time you're able to put towards your yoga practice, your meditation. And it doesn't even have to be simply with that. People who are successful in business, in sports, in music, in their chosen field, well, those people are often successful because they are able to organize their lives such that they are able to give their time and attention to what they want to be developing. And that requires boundaries. That requires understanding what is necessary for success, which also requires sacrifice. And for that, you can go back and re-watch the discussion on the sun, because you can't have everything in life. And Mercury understands this. And the sun is that planet that represents our ability to make sacrifices for what we want. You write out the pros and the cons. I would prefer to experience this rather than that. I would prefer to experience enlightenment, contentment, rather than the drama that everyone else experiences. So of course, you're going to have to make sacrifices to not spend time with people that are dramatic all the time. It's just a sacrifice you have to make if you want this other thing. Mercury understands that because Mercury's goal is to manage the affairs of mundane living. In that same regard, one of the most beautiful ways of working with Mercury is to be focused, discerning, and just simply to have a checklist every day. If there are things you want to accomplish, be discerning about it. What do I want to accomplish? Know it. Be clear about what it is. Mercury really loves clarity. And if you have a checklist, every night before you go to bed, you make a checklist. Okay, these are the things I want to experience in my life. This is how I want to manage the mundane affairs of my life. So what are the things I need to do tomorrow to accomplish that? What are these little bricks I can put into this wall of success that I can write down on a list that are attainable, that tomorrow morning when I wake up, I can just look at it and start checking them off? So many people are not successful and don't work with Mercury very well because they don't even know what they want. And by doing something very simple, like having a checklist, and I don't encourage you to go overboard, things that you can actually achieve within a day. If they've got a checklist, then when they wake up in the morning, they don't have to think, what is the purpose of my life? What am I supposed to do? They can look at that list and say, all right, here's what I'm going to do first. And they just start. And as soon as they start, they're already being successful. And they're already moving closer and closer to their goal. This is true and applicable to all things. I use it a lot when I'm practicing music or learning musical things. I have a big vision of what I want to do musically with certain instruments. And I know that as soon as I start playing, it's going to be impossible for me to just sit down and do that. But I know if I take it step by step and I work on one little bit at a time, no matter how mundane it seems, that as the years go by, in 3 years I'm going to look back, and because I took each of those little steps, I'm going to be much more proficient at that musical instrument than I was had I never done anything like that. And this again ties us back into the idea of magic and using spiritual intention and the power of our thoughts. You are more likely to accomplish something if you start thinking that it's possible for you. If you don't think it's possible, well, then you're probably not going to do anything to achieve it. But if you can just hold the idea that it's possible, then maybe one day you'll think, all right, well, it's possible, so I'm going to do this to start the process. And then you take one step. And all right, I accomplished that. Great. So maybe I can do one more thing. And because you see that, you have that reminder of that gemstone that says you're going to be a successful politician. It reminds you every day. And then you're empowered. And then you take a little step at a time to walk towards that goal. So we have to remember that with Mercury, it is the fusing together of practical application and that greater power and possibility, because Mercury can see all possibilities. He knows that things are possible. What he just has to figure out is how. What is the formula? What is the recipe? And everything this side of time and space has a recipe that if you apply it will more than likely give you success. Think about baking a cake. There's a recipe for that. If you follow that, you're going to make a cake. Now, it may be that you're trying to make a cake and 45 minutes in, the sirens go off and there's a tornado warning. Well, you can't help that. That's nature. So that's going to be those things within the cosmos that are a part of you, but that your little individual person as a personality in time and space can't quite perceive. But you're going to have a greater chance of making that cake if you follow the recipe, even if you've got a tornado coming every now and then. So you have to make way, or you have to give some leniency for the fact that there are things like tornadoes or other issues that occur that are beyond your control. If you can do that, you're more likely going to be successful. And of course, you're going to meet with failure from time to time. That's just part of life. Doesn't matter. You get up, you keep moving forward. Now, onward to our discussion from the Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, Volume 2. Mercury. He gives good research abilities and the capacity to make sound and informed decisions. Mercury gives great attention to detail and can synthesize vast amounts of information to come to a conclusion. A beneficial Mercury will come to correct conclusions based on the information at hand. Now, this is key. So Mercury makes sound and informed decisions, which means if you've got problems with Mercury, practice doing a little more research. Too often people go and they do things, I want a new car. They just buy the first car that they see that looks nice to them and is a pretty color. This is not how Mercury is going to function. Mercury is going to go and do the research and see, all right, well, here are the models of cars that go the longest, get them the best gas mileage, are less likely to break down, which means if they make that informed decision, they're more than likely going to be happy with their purchase in the long run. For example, for a good bit of my life, I didn't really drive very nice cars because for a good bit of my life, I didn't make very much money. But when I was finally able to get cars of my own, what did I do? I made sure to look at vehicles that are going to last 300,000 miles. I don't really care how pretty they are. I don't care how fancy they are. I want to know that I'm going to be able to get in that car and want to be able to drive it until it's driven into the ground, because I'd rather not have a car payment than have one. So I would do research and I would talk to my mechanic, who was a very intelligent person, and he said, look, you had a Camry, a Toyota Camry, and you took care of it well. Of course, it could have used a new paint job because you never washed it and waxed it, but you got it up to 320,000 miles, almost 20 years worth out of that car. You haven't had a car payment in 15 years. And the time came I needed to get a new car. So I did research, and finally he said, here's the car you need to get. And I just about choked when I saw how much it cost because, as you know, I didn't have very fancy cars, and this car was a little bit different. He said, but this car, if you want it to run 300,000 miles like your Camry, this is the one you want, because you want one with four-wheel drive too. So I said, great, I'm going to make that sacrifice of having a car payment so that I can eventually pay it off, and then I'll have another 15 years or so of a good, solid, reliable car. That's the way I approach it, because I like to engage my Mercury. Other people I know, they go out and they buy the first car they can see, and they wonder why all of a sudden it's consuming all this oil, it's only made it to 70,000 miles and it needs all this work, because they didn't do the research. So one of the best ways to work with your Mercury is to learn how to do research. You have to learn how to do it, otherwise your Mercury is going to stay the same. And this final line, a beneficial Mercury will come to correct conclusions based on the information at hand. So this doesn't mean that just because you do wonderful research that everything's always going to work out beautifully for you. It means that based on the research you had at hand, you're going to make the best decision. So you make that decision, and then you let the cards fall where they may. And again, remember, Mercury rules over games. Learning how to play games helps with this. Because when you're playing a game, you just simply play the game as best you can, but you can't really control the final outcome. You can control how much you know and what you're able to see and understand, and then you play the game as best you can and see what happens. If you do that, you have a greater likelihood of winning. But it doesn't mean you're going to win, but your likelihood increases. So one of the key themes here with Mercury as an aspect of yourself is Mercury is also okay with uncertainty. So if you're anxious and fearful because you think your Mercury is messed up, well, part of learning to embody that Mercury is recognizing that when you're playing games, there's no guarantee that everything's going to work out. So learning to make peace with that is useful for Mercury. Playing games gives that capacity. Of course, playing games will also recognize how good your Mars is, because a Mars wants to win, but a Mars isn't a sore loser. So Mercury and Mars work together in that regard too. But as you see, we've talked about the Sun, we've talked about Mars. All of the planets interact in these situations, such as playing games. You'll need your Sun, you'll need your Venus, you'll need your Mercury, you'll need your Moon. But some situations rely a little more heavily on a particular planet, like games, playing the game of life, Mercury. Making sacrifices to win, the Sun. Enjoying it, Jupiter. All these things are useful to know. Now, Mercury rules one's ability to communicate, play games, and have mutually beneficial friendships. Mercury gives the capacity to relate to others without getting too involved in their private lives or being too judgmental of others' choices. So, how are you going to work with Mercury to integrate Mercury such that from a mystical perspective, you are recognizing your wholeness with inside, your oneness with inside, from the inside? Well, can you communicate clearly? Maybe you can't. Many people can't. But how do you learn to do that? By doing it. I can remember when I first started doing public lectures and then finally YouTube talks and podcasts, I believe I was a terrible speaker. I had a little bit of charisma, so people would listen to me, but particularly I didn't communicate very well. And some even think I still don't communicate well, but either way. How did I learn to do that? I went out and I talked. I gave lectures, and I recorded those lectures. And I re-listened to the lectures. And I listened to what I was doing, how I was saying things, and what I was communicating. And I paid attention to where things weren't working right, and I took that out. I just said, making sounds with my mouth. I try not to do that very much anymore because I spent so much time talking and making these recordings and trying to put them on, say, YouTube or in podcasts, that I would spend twice as much time editing the talk out of all the ums, all the you knows, all the weird sounds that I made, that I got tired of doing that editing, that I decided that when I talked, I was going to try to talk a little more slowly, a little more intense, and with a little more intention. And I was going to be very aware of, rather than saying all the time, just pausing, just not saying anything at all. And as the years went by, it became much easier for me to talk without doing those things. So now when I do podcasts or lectures or recordings on YouTube, I do less editing because I don't really need to as much anymore. So Mercury knows how to communicate. And if you don't know how to communicate, you can learn. Mercury rules over learning. Anytime you commit to learning a new skill, doing something different, improving yourself, you are integrating that Mercury more. If you are resistant to it because of fear or other issues, you got to get over it. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to integrate that capacity of Mercury, and you'll never be able to realize the mystical aspects of astrology. We already talked about playing games. Now, having mutual beneficial friendships. Mercury is the kind of friend that is there, doesn't really care who you are, what you're doing, loves you anyway. Now, they might not choose to participate in some of the activities that you're participating in because maybe they don't lead to success or they're detrimental to one's health or well-being, but they're not judging you. They're loving you. So if you notice in your friendships that you are very judgmental, you think your friends should be this way, or you think other people should be this way, it indicates there's a little bit of difficulty with Mercury there. Learning to appreciate people for who they are, let them live their own lives, and being friendly towards them either way. Mercury sees everyone as equal. Mercury recognizes that everyone is God, or everyone is Vishnu, or everyone is the wholeness of life. And so with that kind of vision, Mercury is friendly. So Mercury will always be friendly to people. Again, Mercury may not choose to participate in certain activities that everyone else does, but that friendship can be there. There won't be judgment there. Mercury will be helpful. So if you can work on your friendship so that you are loving your friends no matter who they are or what they're doing. Again, not having to participate if you don't want to, but that's also okay. That is strengthening your Mercury. And that will also improve your ability to relate to others, to communicate with others, and also improve your ability to have friends and to be a friend. So Mercury can communicate information without judgment. Mercury can share boundaries and rules of engagement without offending others. A beneficial Mercury can share difficult information or unpleasant rules and regulations without seeming judgmental. Mercury is matter of fact in his delivery. An afflicted Mercury will offend others or have difficulty expressing one's needs, boundaries, rules, or regulations without an insulting delivery. So Mercury is, he doesn't insult you. If you want to go out on a drinking bend, or you want to go out drinking heavily and whoring it up, and Mercury's not into that, Mercury's not going to say, oh, you really shouldn't do that. That's really bad for you. Mercury's going to say, no, I think I'm just going to go to bed. If you are kind of a pushy neighbor and you've got a strong Mercury and the pushy neighbor comes over and says, I'm trying to work on this property, but in order for me to do it, I have to walk on your roof and they have to put their ladders up and they have to do these sorts of things. Is that okay? And your neighbor built too close to your property line anyway, so it's really the neighbor's fault, and it's more than likely that damage is going to occur to your house because of this. So a healthy Mercury says, no, that's okay. You need to find another way. And he's just saying it because that boundary is there. Mercury is not coming at it from a place of, you shouldn't have built your property so close to my property line, and how could you ask me to do this? When people have weak Mercuries, what they do is they feel that inside, that you shouldn't have done this in the first place, and now I have to let you do it, and then they let the person do it. And then they develop resentment and anger. And then it gets worse, because then you just get walked on more and more. But when Mercury is strong, you've got this neighbor who takes advantage of people, and he comes over and is trying to act all nice when really he shouldn't have done anything in the first place that he's done. And he asks for you to do something else, which is again stepping over the boundaries of good neighborliness. And the strong Mercury says, no, that's okay. You can find another way. And again, there's no anger there. There's no stress. It's just saying, look, these are the results, or these are the consequences of what you did. I'm not going to enable you. So Mercury is not an enabler to do this. And then life goes on. Of course, the neighbor might be upset, but that's the neighbor's problem, not the person with the Mercury that we're talking about here. That's a kind of an example that you can consider there. But Mercury doesn't offend others. If Mercury, say, is in a situation where they have a lot of family members who believe differently than them, and the family members want them to go to church or believe a certain way or do a certain thing, well, a weak Mercury will feel like they need to please everybody and act like they're fitting in. So the weak Mercury becomes chameleon to their own detriment. The strong Mercury is able to say, I understand you want me to go to church with you and you want me to believe in the Savior idea, but I just don't, so I'm not going. That's what he says. The person might be offended because they're weak in their own belief system, but life goes on. Or on another side of that, Mercury might say, it's really dumb that you believe in that. I can't believe that you think that that's real, and it ends up insulting the other person. So you see, the healthy Mercury recognizes the other person has certain beliefs for whatever reason. He allows them to have their beliefs, but Mercury himself doesn't feel like if he doesn't believe in them, he doesn't have to reassure them. He just tells them what he thinks. Or another version of that Mercury is, rather than telling them what they think in a non-offensive way, just buckles and says, yeah, sure, I'll go to church with you. But the whole time they're resenting the fact that they've taken all this time out of their day listening to a sermon that they don't believe in, and it goes on. So Mercury is very clear about their boundaries, very clear about the rules and regulations. Doesn't make it anything personal, just makes it into, this is the situation, take it or leave it. So learning to embody that helps to strengthen your Mercury, and you'll find that you actually get stronger and stronger in your own inner truth. And people tend to respect you more. Not in the sense of glorifying your ego, oh, I respect this person, but they see you as a strong, solid, someone who knows what they're about and lives it. And we need more of that in the world. We need more of that kind strength of Mercury that is not judgmental. Now, Mercury rules the senses and how the world is perceived through those senses. So a well-supported Mercury will perceive the world accurately. An afflicted Mercury will have difficulty perceiving the world or situations accurately. This is a little bit harder to discuss, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships, because we often think that our point of view is the right one. Even if deep down inside we act like we're welcoming of other people's ideas and philosophies, we tend to think ours is the right one. And when it comes to relationships, someone might be interacting with you in a certain way, and it seems aggressive or violent or difficult or contentious, and we perceive it as though it's an attack on ourselves. But a healthy Mercury will probably step back and say, this person was raised a certain way. They've experienced things in their life that make them like this. So I don't know why they're acting that way, but I know it's not really because of me. Now, of course, if you're just an asshole, it probably is because of you. But good Mercury is not usually an asshole. So one of the things that we need to do to strengthen our Mercury is to be a little more discerning, a little more objective, to step back away from our limited personality and everything we think is right, and learn to ask, what's really going on here? And you might not know what's really going on there. And oftentimes you simply have to admit that. And admitting that is useful too, because Mercury, again, is okay not knowing. Mercury is okay saying, I have 6 out of 10 variables here, so I can guess, but because I don't have all 10 variables, I know that there's a chance I'm wrong. But I'm okay with that. But I'm going to play the game anyway and bet on my 60%. And he rolls the dice. But then if he loses, he recognizes that there was the 40% that he didn't understand, and that that's just the way it goes. So when we think about these ideas of Mercury, really recognize that Mercury is very practical. Mercury recognizes that there are certain rules of success in every field, in every area, and Mercury is willing to be the craftsman of his or her own life to figure out what is required, what is the information required to make the best go of it possible, while recognizing that while we are engaged in this side of the time and space continuum, that we don't have all the information. We're never going to have all the information as long as we are identified with a person, with a Ryan, with a Mike, with a Melissa, with a Jordan, with anyone who's got a name. You're not going to have all the information, but you can get the best information possible and then roll the dice from there. And if you can live that way, your Mercury will get stronger. You'll tend to be happier, less anxious, and more than likely, you will tend to be a good deal more successful than you were before you started. So with Mercury, step number one, just get started. Do your best and then refine it as you go. Continue learning. Mercury is the planet of learning. So Mercury doesn't just do something and say, oh, it didn't work, and then keep doing that same thing over and over. Mercury does something, steps back, and says, all right, what could have contributed to the success or error of this, works it out, tries again while adjusting those variables until it clicks. And then success is there, if it's possible for it to be there. And I say that because I'm reminded of a quote from Ramana Maharshi, and let me pull it up here. This is something always to remember. No matter how wonderfully you're working with your Mercury, you still have to work with your Mercury. So don't take this as a get out of jail free card, or like you're not able, you shouldn't be engaging in life, because all yoga teachers talk about karma yoga, or action without attachment to the results of those actions. And of course, that's something, if you want to know about, I recommend learning to practice Kriya Yoga and signing up for the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program that begins every January. But if you're not, forget about that. But this quote is important to remember. After you've done your best, after you've tried, you've figured it out, you've learned, you've done all you can. The ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their destiny. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen, try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen, try as you may to prevent it. This much is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain silent.